I know I speak for everyone here today when I say that none of us will ever forget Charlie Kirk, and neither now will history.
The President of the United States joined tens of thousands of people gathered at State Farm Stadium in Glendale today to remember political activist Charlie Kirk, the founder of the Valley-based Turning Point USA. Good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. Who's who of Republican politics spoke at the memorial service for Charlie Kirk. We're going to spend the next half hour looking back at the speeches from today's service and talking about Kirk's legacy in the Republican Party. And joining me today, Republican political consultant Marcus Dell'Artino and Democratic political consultant DJ Quinlan. I want to thank you both for being here. Before we start getting into these speeches and whatnot, you watched the services today, 4 or 5 hours of the speeches and whatnot. Start with you, Marcus. What were your top takeaways?
Well, first of all, I got to go hats off to the city of Glendale, DPS, and all the law enforcement that was involved in today's events. I mean, they had a week roughly to put together one of the just most intense events. And
the context was crazy, too, because the security just had to be extremely tight.
Yeah, and by all accounts, a successful event. So hats off to them. Look, my hats off moment is definitely Erica Kirk. Real bombshell moment when she said she forgave the shooter and really came from a Christian perspective in talking about the Bible. And wow, it was a jaw-dropping moment. In all honesty, I don't know if I could get there as soon as she did, so clearly a better Christian than I am, but I'm working on it.
Impressions, what top impressions from you from watching this today from the Democratic perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a spectacle. I think a lot of people made the point that it kind of felt like a church revival, a little bit of a Trump rally. Certainly a somber event, and I also echo Marcus's thoughts about just the turnaround on the security was pretty amazing for the city of Glendale, the local police, everybody involved.
Yeah, and I think one of the big aspects of today's event was the crowd size. I think you look at the number of people who were out there, I think it speaks a lot to the influence that Charlie Kirk had on supporters and that Turning Point USA has on politics right now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk was I will say politician, though he wasn't elected to office, perfectly calibrated for the social media age. He had a following across the country with a lot of folks of all ages. People focus on the young crowd, but really I think his following was kind of middle-aged and older. Mm-hmm. And certainly I think a lot of people traveled from out of state into Glendale to watch this event.
Yeah, what did you take away? I mean, it's enormous amount of significance with the Turning Point USA folks really on display today.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And let's keep in mind also, you packed one stadium and had overflow into another stadium that had reached capacity. And I felt awful for this poor gentleman who stayed up all night. He drove out from California. And the poor guy he got there too late. He couldn't get into the stadium. But it gives you a concept of, there was people coming from all over the country for this event. And to DJ's point, it sort of was a revival. And the president said that. So I'm not being weird. The president said this is a revival. And I think it's really a momentum builder for Turning Point.
Yeah, and it was a lot of mix. It was a lot of religious sentiment at there. There was a mix of politics in that. I want to play a soundbite from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I think this gives a pretty fair description of a lot of the speeches that were given today.
But Charlie Kirk was bold. He actively sought out to engage peacefully, respectfully, those who he disagreed with. As recently as 2 days ago, we learned of one of the hosts on CNN who said that one of the messages he had gotten just a few days before Charlie's passing was from him, inviting him to dialogue. And he did this on campuses, he did this on podcasts, he did this on radio shows, he did this on television shows. Time and again, he sought to engage those he disagreed with because he understood that we were not created to isolate ourselves from one another.
It was another, theme that you heard a lot of people talking about, his willingness to debate, to exercise the First Amendment and whatnot. What did you take away from that kind of sentiment in speeches like Rubio's today?
Well, I loved Rubio's speech because I had just seen that interview with the CNN host, and he is powerfully moved talking about his text exchange because they were going at it. I mean, these two were bitter rivals over whatever issue, I can't remember at this moment, but they were fighting over it. And now, putting it in context, Charlie reached out to him and said, hey, I'd love to just sit down with you and talk about it. And it moved him And I think it shows a lot about Charlie Kirk, and also a lot about where we are as a country, where we can get to, where we can have these conversations.
And, Charlie Kirk obviously loved debating, was known for debating, and currently right now, I think appropriately, I mean, he would at least agree and want to see this. There is a debate over his legacy right now. You're the Democrat at the table. What do you think his legacy is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because I think, Charlie Kirk was a very incredibly divisive figure. And I think, in the aftermath of like a horrific event, and obviously political violence is a scourge, like everybody should be sad that this happened. Looking back at some of the things Charlie said over his lifetime, we don't necessarily need to gloss over them either. And I actually think he would agree with that. I think his legacy is going to be very mixed, I think, when we look back. But I hope it's actually the moment is a hard reset for all of us, hopefully, to maybe live by the things we're all talking about right now. And I'm a little afraid from some of the things I heard from the rally tonight, particularly from the president, that's not necessarily where they're going towards.
And what comments are you specifically talking about?
I think particularly trying to utilize the full force of the federal government to go after, quote unquote, radical left-wing organizations when, it was a tragic event that we saw, certainly in the realm of political violence, but I don't think we've seen evidence that there's any sort of connection to, quote unquote, left-wing organizations. I think that's very dangerous talk and a very dangerous route to head down as a country.
Yeah, and I think the general sentiment I'm getting from folks that I talk to on a day-to-day basis is basically everyone's condemning political violence of any nature at this point.
Sure, and I think the legacy coming out of at least today and the last week, I mean, really, the tone that I'm seeing is around the First Amendment, exercise of free speech, that's what Charlie was about. I think if you look at every interview, and I think that almost every speech today mentioned it, and I think that's a positive coming out of this, if we have more Americans talking about freedom of speech.
Well, and certainly one of the big things, a legacy that is left behind is Turning Point USA. Here's a soundbite from the Vice President of the United States talking about the importance of that organization.
Our whole administration is here, but not just because we love Charlie as a friend, even though we did, but because we know we wouldn't be here without him. Charlie built an organization that reshaped the balance of our politics. Turning Point brought millions of young people into conversation with one another, brought millions of people into advocacy. He asked of us, not just that we talk about saving our country, but that we actually go and do it, and we do it together.
And that is a huge part of the legacy. I mean, he brought a lot of young people into voting. Now, it used to be that the Republicans that used to be older voters. He injected a lot of fresh energy, a lot of young voters into that, and Democrats have been paying the price for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things he has been very successful at is doing voter registration, showing up on campuses, having these big events. Particularly what it does is create sound bites that go on social media. Like I said, I think he was kind of a politician who was perfectly calibrated to this like social media algorithm age, and I think that accounts for a lot of his success, his following, his crowd, everything.
And we're going to end the segment on this question. I mean, talk a little bit about the significance of bringing young voices into the Republican Party.
Well, I think Charlie, and it was mentioned today, but Charlie sat around and said, hey, I'm on college campuses, and if I continue to let this go, this next generation is going to all be Democrats or liberals or progressives or whatever we're talking about, and I want to do something about it, and that's what he did. He went in there and had these conversations one-on-one to change the debate because he wanted to recruit these younger voters into the Republican Party, something that several members today admitted that they didn't believe could happen.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a big part of his legacy, too, because those young voters he reached today probably going to be Republican voting that way for years to come. But we'll have to see what happens with that. But anyway, up next, today's event went beyond a simple remembrance of Kirk. We'll look at some of the politics of the event when Politics Unplugged continues. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. This memorial went beyond a simple remembrance for Charlie Kirk. There was also a lot of political commentary thrown in. Let's bring the panel back in and take a look at some of that. Of course, when you get this many people around in a stadium and you put Donald Trump in there, there's going to be a lot of politics, and there's some raw political talk today as well. I want to start and get your reaction to this. This is Donald Trump talking about his election victory last year.
The election of, that beautiful day, November 5th, 2024. Do you remember that day? It was 9 months ago. What a day that was. I mean, we had a pretty good day in the first one. And I must tell you, on the second one, we had a phenomenal day. But a lot of bad things happened. And now that's not even questioned. They cheated like dogs. But we got them back, didn't we, huh?
And Mark, so let's start with you. We're at a memorial, a tribute. A lot of heartfelt stuff was said on stage. Donald Trump, keeping on message, at least his political message there, talking about cheating in the elections.
Well, it's funny because when I was watching it, you could clearly, the beginning of the speech, he's clearly on the teleprompter. And it starts down sort of this moving speech from the heart. And all of a sudden, you watch his eyes go straight on. You're definitely not looking at a teleprompter, and this stuff starts to happen. And we covered vaccines. We got a big announcement on autism tomorrow. It was almost every issue under the sun. Tariffs. Apparently, Charlie loved tariffs. A whole bunch of issues. And honestly, it's just him. It's not out of the ordinary. I think we all were thinking something like this might happen. But to that point, I think it overshadowed, like, Erica Kirk's moment was so beautiful that going into this politics thing was a little jolting to the viewer.
Yeah, were you shocked at all that he went on that? Because it seemed like he was really sticking with, or at least the beginning of that speech, was really sticking with the memorial to Charlie Kirk and remembering him, and then he goes off into some familiar directions like this.
Yeah, to Marx's point, I think the teleprompter must have failed at some point. But, I think it was a huge mistake to have Donald Trump follow Erica Kirk. I just think, you had a very measured speech where, it met the moment of a somber memorial, and it turned into a typical Donald Trump rally full of insults and conspiracy theories very quickly. And I don't think it was very fitting of the moment.
And he also kind of kept things a little bit current. I mean, he's talked a little bit about Jimmy Kimmel, the late night talk show host, who's been put on indefinite hiatus here. Take a listen to this.
Some of the very people who call you a hater for using the wrong pronoun were filled with glee at the killing of a father with 2 beautiful young children. And the same commentators who this week are screaming fascism over a canceled late-night TV show where the anchor had no talent and no ratings, last week were implying that Charlie Kirk deserved what happened to him.
And since what's happened, I mean, we've seen some people lose their job for saying insensitive things about this shooting. In Jimmy Kimmel's, in that situation, it seems like he was inaccurate with something he was saying there. What's your take about what's going on now with that and this overall conversation about free speech we've been seeing over the past week?
Well, I mean, the president's characterization was far more inaccurate than anything Jimmy Kimmel said, which is ironic. But I think the thing that's most dangerous about this moment we're in is we're actually seeing the full force of the federal government through the FCC chair, threatening stations, threatening licensure, in a way that we frankly just haven't seen in modern political history. And I think if the lesson of Charlie Kirk's death is about the First Amendment, there's a big misalignment between the words that people are saying and the actions coming from this administration.
And are you at all surprised, and what is your take from Donald Trump bringing this up at this event?
I think, he's still angry. And I think I knew going into this, look, most of these people had a personal relationship with Charlie. And they lost their friend, and they're upset about it. And sometimes we say things when we're angry. And I think we've got a little bit of that to go through right now. I would not be happy if one of my closest and dearest friends was murdered and essentially live on TV. And so I think everybody needs a little time to heal. But again, kudos to Erica Kirk, who took that moment to really try and bring America together.
Do you think that's going to bring the temperature down? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about the escalation, and we've seen the political violence. Do you think Erica Kirk's comment, you brought this up a couple of times, where she had forgiven the shooter, do you think that's going to bring the temperature down a little bit?
I think she certainly has the potential. That's what I saw today. She has the potential to do that.
Okay. I want to also play this. Let's get back a little bit to some of the more political statements that were made there. Donald Trump Jr. also gave a heartfelt speech about his friend Charlie Kirk, but he also mixed in some politics. Take a listen to this message.
If you believe our government should put the interests of our citizens first, welcome. If you believe American workers deserve dignity and American families should be able to afford a good life on one salary, welcome. If you reject the propaganda of the fake news media, welcome.
And you're hearing that, if you just listen to that and you didn't know anything else that was going on, you would think that was a campaign rally, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a campaign rally at times. I think almost with the exception of Erica Kirk. The tenor of the whole event felt like a campaign rally.
And what is the line that you have to walk when you're doing something like this?
Well, first of all, that wasn't even the best part of his speech. Did you see him imitate his dad in front of his dad? And he's very good at it. I was pretty impressed, to be honest with you. But I would say
I could do an impersonation of my father.
Charlie Kirk is both a political person and a leader of a church, a Christian man. I don't think anybody should be surprised that politics were brought up in this venue or that God was brought up in this venue. That's why these people came. That's why the stadium was packed. So.
You said you don't think there's any lines that were crossed or anything like that? Because I think heading into that, I looked at, was looking at Charlie Kirk and I was like, yeah, I mean, he was a very political guy. He was very he had a strong faith. It's going to be a lot of that in this event, and there certainly was.
There certainly was. I think what you're probably thinking about was this a Wellstone moment? And that refers to a former senator that died in a plane crash in the 80s. His service got quite political, and the Democrat that was going to take his spot, who was largely favored, lost by a slim margin because people thought that they inserted too much politics. I don't think that is the case in this time today in 2025, or the case with the Republican Party at Turning Point.
Okay, I have to take a pause right here, but up next we'll take a look at the future of Turning Point USA and its role in the Republican Party. That's next on Politics Unplugged. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Turning Point USA has played a huge role in the Republican Party in the past few years, particularly in bringing young people into the party. So what happens now without Turning Point's founder and figurehead? Let's bring in the panel. And, they named Erica Kirk as the new CEO this past week. She's a lot to fill, a lot to replace there. I mean, Charlie Kirk, regardless of what you thought about his politics, was certainly a charismatic figure and had that power, that ability to draw crowds, particularly at those campuses, and draw a lot of attention that certainly helped Turning Point USA and its mission. What do you think happens moving forward?
I think part of today was showing the Turning Point organization, Erica can do this, and I think she succeeded in that role. And by the way, all the funders have re-upped. We're not worried about Turning Point continuing. I think they're going to be just fine. I do think, to your point, that personality that can go on a college campus and spend hours on there doing what Charlie did. It may not be Erica, or it may be Erica, but there might be another person who fits that role into that recruiting. The sole mission will continue.
Let's bring up a soundbite here from Erica. She talked a little bit about moving forward with Turning Point USA. Let's take a listen right here.
He left this world without regrets. He did 100% of what he could every day. But I want you to know something. Charlie died with incomplete work, but not with unfinished business.
And what do you think? I mean, you're looking at this from the Democratic Party. I mean, moving forward, replacing someone like that has got to be a very difficult task.
Certainly. I mean, like I said a couple times on the show, I think Charlie Kirk was actually somebody who is well suited to the moment in terms of the way our politics work online these days. I think I agree with Marcus. I think Erica showed that she certainly has a lot of potential in terms of filling those shoes and maybe even having some strengths that Charlie did. And I think the bigger question for Turning Point is what direction are they going to take as an organization? From an organization that was peak election denialism, busing in 80 buses of people to January 6th? Or are they going to be a more serious organization, especially as Donald Trump is a lame duck? In his final years as president, where does the Republican Party go? What role does Turning Point play in that? I think those are very big unanswered questions.
Yeah, we're going to have to wait. I mean, this is also really just fresh. It's just happening. When everything kind of smoke kind of clears, what are the kinds of conversations do you think they're going to be having over at Turning Point USA?
Well, who's going to which college campus? We got to go out there and get aggressive on this and keep our recruiting up. Again, there's going to be a fundraising component to that they're going to have to continue, and then it's going to be who's our next candidate, not only in these midterms that we've got coming up fairly soon, but going into the presidential, because they're going to be dependent upon to probably again run the ground game for that Republican candidate.
Yeah, that's really important, because Turning Point USA does have almost like a slate of candidates running for statewide offices. Is this at all going to affect those elections next year?
I think it has energized them like nobody's business. I think if the shooter thought that he was going to kill an organization and a movement, he was sadly mistaken, and he has achieved the exact opposite. And that organization is fired up and ready to go. And, by all accounts, it looks like, especially with today, going on all cylinders.
Yeah, and do you agree with that? Because several times throughout the event today, we heard people not just lionize Charlie Kirk, but they called him a martyr, and saying that his life his message is now larger than it ever could have been. Do you think that is happening? Do you think that will happen?
I think there's a segment of the population that is very, very enthusiastic, is going to be very motivated by this. I think a lot of the rest of us are tired of political violence. They're tired of this heated rhetoric. They're ready to move on. I think there's actually a danger for groups like Turning Point that they can take the wrong lesson from a moment like this, where people actually want to return to actual civility. And that's, I think, where the legacy of Charlie Kirk gets a little complicated, because the experience of Charlie Kirk on a day-to-day basis online is very different than the story that's being told today.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the political violence again. Do you think the president hit the right tone today, or do you think he could have said a little bit more about a country coming together and maybe ending this?
We're always going to have that discussion. It doesn't matter if he hit every word that everybody wanted to hit. We're always going to say, could he do more? And I would argue that Erica did that. And it was probably, frankly, stronger coming from Erica, no offense to the president, but stronger coming from the surviving spouse to bring the country together, to say I forgive him because the Bible tells me to, than it was from Donald Trump.
The problem is Erica's not the president.
Yeah, I was going to say, are we getting the kind of leadership the country needs right now from this president?
No, I mean, clearly we're not. I mean, ask any Democrat. He was 1,000 miles away from doing anything that could be perceived as unifying.
All right, and give you a final word on that.
I think he had some unifying moments in that speech. I think we're focused on a couple phrases.
We're going to have to end it right there. That's all the time we have. But be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged.